I have embarrassingly blown plenty of sales. It was usually a super awkward conversation and it totally drained my confidence. But eventually I learned what I was doing to lose these customers, and it turns out I was listening to some really common sales advice. So I'm gonna share with you right now these 3 principles that not only stopped me from losing customers, but that actually got the sales flowing naturally and predictably. Number 1, this is really simple actually. It's the principle of listening. Most sales conversations stall out because we're talking when we should be listening. Here's how I see it. When a customer asks questions, it's not an invitation to dump information. It's a request for understanding. For every statement that you make, you gotta finish it up with a question and then take a step back and stop talking. I know it makes some awkward silence, but that awkward silence is actually your friend because it creates space for the customer to process what you just said. See, you should be talking only enough to keep the conversation going. Talk too much and you're gonna lose them. See, I used to think I was giving my customers a great service by answering all their questions, standing there being prepared to answer more questions and giving them as much detail as possible because I wanted people to make an informed decision, you know? Educate your customer, they say. But no matter what, that rarely moved the sale forward. So honestly, it wore me out. I got tired of just giving all these details and being so hyper prepared for whatever's gonna come at me, you know, having all the right things to say, that I kind of just stopped and I started asking people this question. And then over time, I refined that approach into a framework that I was actually able to see and apply to future sales conversations. See, and it really just has 3 steps. I would respond to whatever they told me, you know, acknowledge them. Then I'd meet them where they are, and then I would simply pose a question. Like, it's a pretty simple framework, you know, 1, 2, 3. But when you loop that cycle over and over, it turned out that's what I needed to move the sale forward. So for instance, it could sound like this. I meet a customer at their home and we're supposed to be looking at a project at their house and they say, how much is this gonna cost me? And my response could be, look, honestly, this is usually between $5,000 and $50,000, but I don't wanna overwhelm you with all the options right now. What made you call us in the first place? You know, and then they'd answer and I'd respond, I do the exact same thing again. Oh, okay, I see. And so I can really understand your needs a little bit better. How long has it been that way? You know, and then I can follow that up with, well, what have you done so far to improve it? Or who else have you talked to about this? Or have you had other contractors out giving you some other opinions? Where are you guys at on all this? And see, I could keep going, but the point is they needed clarity, not price. And my job was to get that to them. So instead of going into, well, this costs $5,000, this costs $9,000, this is $12,000, and if we did that, and if we did that, and they get optionitis is what I call it, they're just gonna stop. They're not gonna move forward with you because you're not helping them get clarity or navigate that. My job is to pull the gold out of them. The answer for them and for my sale is inside of them. And honestly, a lot of the times, if you've seen my video about the 80% rule, I talk about 80% of the time, whatever a customer just asked you for, they're not even gonna buy it in the first place. And why is that? Because it's simply their starting point. They don't know what's really important to them. They just gotta start the conversation. Your job is to take that over, 1, 2, 3, ask quality questions and pull that gold up out of them. So it's way less talking and a lot more questions. And when you do that, you'll notice people's demeanor will change too. They're actually gonna be a lot more open about their concerns and they'll begin to share the things that really are important to them. See, a lot of people hide that. They don't wanna feel vulnerable. They don't know if they trust you yet, you know? But the more that you ask these quality questions like I'm talking about, people are gonna crack open. And you're never gonna get that kind of depth by just always trying to have the right answer, the right thing to say to people. Here's some specific questions you can try. Most people buy these for 1 of 2 reasons, this or that. Which one really resonates with you more? Or you could say, what would you do differently if this product was available to you today? See, my rule of thumb is I like to only give 1 answer for 3 questions that I have for them. That ensures I'm still giving them content, I'm giving them something valuable, but I'm pulling out of them more than what I'm feeding them. That approach kind of lets them know like, hey, I'm a real human here, you know? Ask too many questions, it's gonna feel more like a prison interrogation than a conversation with a person. So the magic really happens when you shift from explaining to exploring. When they share a concern with you, you get curious. And this really matters because every time you're talking, you're only confirming what you already know. And see, you can't guide your customer like that. But when you're listening, now you're gaining what you need to be able to move the whole thing forward. Because the path to closing the sale is not through your words, it's through theirs. Okay, now, creating space for the conversation is super powerful, but if you don't get the context, you're gonna leave them in the dust. Here's what I mean. The context principle says that customers cannot value your solution if they don't have the context to understand it. Think of it like you're walking into a movie, but you're 20 minutes late, you know, like no matter how good the film is, you're still going to be a little bit lost throughout the whole thing. So before explaining something to your customer in any situation, you got to establish some context. Recently, I was explaining one of my coaching programs to a potential client, and he kept saying, man, I don't really know if this is what I need. And of course, I could have listed all the features, advantages, benefits, and like the logical answers. But I knew that that wasn't really what he needed, and many of us honestly would do that. So I asked him, hey man, what have you done already to try to figure this out? And it was his answer that illuminated the issue. It wasn't my explanation, it was him. See, his explanation changed the product that he bought. I had to pull it out of him. I didn't have the context. I didn't know what was really important to him. So instead of just rattling off what I thought was important to him, I simply dug a little bit deeper. I got context, he got clarity, and it was really easy to land on what was right at that point. See, why do we spend so much time selling when what people really need help with is just getting the information out of them? So here's a couple of context creating questions. Some of these are from the earlier example. So before I share with you how this works, what have you tried so far? Or what have other people told you about how to solve this problem? Have you tried it? Did that work? Or what makes this the right choice for you instead of that? So the key is just starting with their world, not yours. And once you get that context, then you can begin to establish a bridge to a solution. Because if your customers don't have context, your value has no place to land. And on top of that, you might be establishing perfect context, asking great questions, but then the second that an objection arises, it can still fall apart. So this next principle about handling objections is crucial. But I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, Joel, what if I spend all this time with customers just for them to flake out? Like, what if it's just not a good fit? I've literally just wasted all this time and I could have been pitching somebody else. And that's a completely valid concern. Time is super valuable as an entrepreneur. I felt that literal exact same tension, trying to hurry up and qualify and look for better qualifying techniques so that I can go bing, bing, bing. I can get to one after the other, more sales, optimize my time. I totally get it. But here's what I've discovered. Taking your time in the moment saves you hours on the back end following up with prospects that are never gonna buy from you. I know people say it's a numbers game, but quality does matter. So I just ask you, which one of those is more time consuming for you? If you got the leads and you want to bang through them, sure, go ahead. But that's just never worked for me. It's not gotten me 5-star Google reviews. It's just gotten me people. You see what I'm saying? And so the truth is, the more effectively you listen, the better you're going to qualify. You're going to identify the bad fits much faster. And honestly, on top of that, you're gonna have a lot of sales happening by default because the process of asking questions, getting answers builds a ton of trust in your customers. So let's talk about number 3. This is the objection principle. Objections are not roadblocks. They're signposts that tell you where the conversation needs to go next. I believe every objection is just a request for more information in disguise. So when you hear an objection, instead of getting defensive and getting that intensity and that anxiety worked up, get curious. For instance, recently I had a guy tell me that my coaching program was way too expensive. And because I 100% believe in my coaching programs, it would have been super easy to just, bang it out and justify it. But the problem is that approach treats his objection as if it were some kind of obstacle to overcome. And so I just simply asked him, compared to what, man? And his answer actually revealed to me that it wasn't about my price getting compared to some other competitor. It was more so compared to all the money that he had blown on solutions that didn't help him in the first place. And all he was thinking about, spending $5,000 with Joel, oh my gosh, that's just more money down the pit because that's all he'd ever experienced before. You see what I mean? He was running out of money because he blew it on stuff that didn't work, right? And if I'd have squared off to him in that moment and treated that objection like some kind of obstacle, man, I'd have just kicked him while he was down. His objection wasn't about my price at all. It was about everybody else's that was flushed down the toilet, man. See, this dude was willing to pay a lot of money just so long as he had a solution. Think about it. He had spent $9,000 up until that point, but didn't get anything that he needed. I come in at $5,000 and he's telling me my price is too high. So don't square off to people. Don't get defensive with them when they raise up an objection. You could just say something like, hey, honestly, thanks a lot for bringing up the price. Most people have one of two concerns with it, this or that. Does either one of those resonate with you? Or it could be like, hey, thanks a lot for bringing it up. And if the product and the price were agreeable to you, would there be any other concerns? And that one's huge, man, because all of these, what they're gonna do is they're gonna flush out something that really is this underlying issue. And that's what you want. Because if you don't handle that now, that's gonna end up being the real objection later, you see? So the key here is just simply treat every objection as valuable information from your customer and not something that you got to push and shove out of the way. And how you handle these objections is really going to determine whether or not you make this sale. So you got to keep digging. But now that you know how to lose a customer, you got to next know how to keep that momentum going and the strategies that keep you moving forward. And in this video, I go over exactly that. There's actually 3 of them, keys that I have learned that are going to keep the conversation moving forward with your customer so that you don't stall out. These are strategies that keep the customer engagement high from start to finish.